going to talk about on-farm demonstrations and making connections today.
We have some great panel members. Let's have them introduce themselves. We'll start with Tim Becker.
Past county agent, farm with my brother Mark in Eddy County, which is about halfway between Jamestown and Devils Lake in North Dakota.
And our other panelist is Kim Melton.
Kim Melton with the Wilkin County Soil and Water Conservation District in Breckenridge, Minnesota.
Great. And there's a lot that goes into working on farm, whether you're at the county or the state level. So it's nice to have representation from Tim, from Eddy County, from the work you're doing, but then also as a farmer, and Kim, the work that you're doing down there in Wilkin County. And then Miranda and I are doing a lot of the stuff at the state level. So it's important to think about all the different perspectives and for making connections from farmers to conservation districts to people at NDSU.
So Tim, you're a farmer and you worked for Extension. What works for making connections in person from both perspectives?
You know, when I was in Extension, we used to say, you know, that the term was, you know, people would ask questions, be honest. You know, if you don't have the answer, find the answer, but always, you know, you don't always have to have the answer. You know, where do you go to make those connections? You know, there's a lot of places. I used to say that I went to the coffee shop a lot in the morning just to make the connections. There's a lot of different places as an extension agent or, you know, other people within the ag industry can make connections. That could be, you know, local insurance meetings, you know, the egg producer meetings that are put on. You know, sometimes they're after work. You don't like to, you know, you go to work from 8 to 5, but sometimes you got to put in some time in the evening. But go to where the farmer's at, and sometimes making those connections are so important to the job that we do. That so if we can go to where the farmer's at, and that might be some local meetings in town. Sometimes that's the local watering hole in town, but you know, you got to, you know, mind your business when you're at those type of meetings, and sometimes just drinking a pop, but being present in your local community. Get involved in your local community, and whether that be at meetings or other functions that are going on, just get involved and people will get to know you. I think that's so important. But again, you know, people will start asking you questions. Be honest, find the answer, and if they do ask questions that you don't know the answer to, tell them you look it up, but get back to them the next day. Find the answer and get back to them the next day.
Tim, I've been in the field with you when you've been in action with some of these growers that you work with, and you're also a very good listener. And you know a lot about these individuals that you're working with, whether it's their spouse or their kids or their sports they're doing, or you know, how do you build that relationship that's that close with some of the growers you work with?
Well, I think, you know, you kind of answered it there, Abby. You know, by listening and getting to know the people. You know, sometimes, you know, it's kind of like making new friends. If you want to make a friend, you got to listen, you know, and get to know the people, you know, build a relationship with them. And, you know, I used to have a producer in the county that would call up and just say, you know, why don't you come out for coffee this afternoon? And usually the whole afternoon, I shouldn't say the whole afternoon, but the time we were there was spent talking about his farm and you know, what he was working on. We'd get into a vehicle and go out and look at some things. But, you know, when they start calling you and telling you to come out, you know, you build a relationship, and that relationship needs to grow, and you need to foster that.
Kim, you've also been very successful at building some of these relationships. You know, maybe you use some coffee shops to make connections, or maybe you have some other strategies. What are some of the places or networks that you've tapped into to make those connections?
I guess I'm really good I like meeting in the field. A lot of times when they call me, it is because of a resource concern or something they got going on. And so place starts in the field, but later it moves to the shop, or I like to go places where they're comfortable. Since our office is a federal office and FSA is right across the hall, it's usually our office is where things start because they are coming in here anyway to sign up for those programs. And so that kind of works real nice, as then they'll pop their head in the door and say, hey, Kim, what do you got going on? And should we talk more about that cover crop? And so that's really nice that we are located with FSA, because all those farmers come in here anyway. But typically, like this time of year and with COVID, everything shut down, I've been doing a lot of shop calls, or, you know, can I come pick your brain, or can I come get your thoughts on what would a good soil health program look like to you? What would it entail? And more recently, I just finished up agronomist meetings. And so working with them, I think that really gets the foot in the door, because then they can also help talk about our programs. And then I even had a couple of them say, let's meet with this guy right here in our meeting area, because a lot of the agronomist departments have big meeting rooms. And so you got to go to where these people are comfortable, where there's going to be space. So that's why I like the shop or the tailgate. But and it's someplace confidential that they're not going to tell you all about their farming operation all the time in the coffee shop, because others will hear it and they don't want to share those details. And so I find that it's better if you go to the shop or someplace they're comfortable, or with an agronomist at their meeting room where you have lots of space, and you can talk one-on-one, and they can run those scenarios by someone else that they really trust and they rely on for their cash crops.
So I know you work very closely with a local crop consultant in your area, and forming those connections too. Let's turn to Miranda and see, you meet with a lot of farmers and ranchers, and you've done a very good job establishing those relationships in person, but how have those things changed and how do you connect online? Because I know you've also done a good job in that too.
I think the key to just making those initial connections is getting out, meeting with the county agents and going to the county meetings, meeting people, go to the producer meetings as well, whether that's the Stockmen's Association meeting to meet other ranchers, and just get out there. That was one of the big first steps for me as I started. And now that I've made those connections and we have some demonstration projects, we're working with those ranchers directly and communicating with them how they feel comfortable, whether that's, they need a text message, they want a phone call, or if we need to go out and visit them one-on-one, however they feel most comfortable, which has been tricky as we've transitioned in the last year. And so in the last year, we transitioned a lot of things online, and I think we're continuing to learn and improve on how we do our online presence, with webinars and presence in social media, and just making sure people know we're still doing stuff, we're still here. That was really important to me. And now with the webinars, I think we reach more people. It's not maybe the same type of quality as that in-person conversations that we can have, but it's convenient for those farmers and ranchers because we can record them and they can access that whenever they have the time, because we're all busy.
Yeah, and I think when we go back to, at one point I was new in this position, and I suppose I've been here about 8 years, and I don't know how long you've been in yours, Miranda, but
almost six.
And so at one point we were new, and that's some of the questions that we do get about how, as a new person, do you make these connections? And one of my priorities when I was new was to show that I could listen. I think that was something that I maybe was inherent to me because I grew up a listener, but showing that I could listen and I could take those thoughts into my head, process them, and then hopefully share them, back in a way that, or provide those resources that are actually helpful. So that was one thing that I've kind of focused on, is really the listening aspect of what I do. And then there's another question that kind of came up back in December, about how a researcher or someone from main campus should dress, right? I mean, so outward appearance is also something that we need to, that makes us relatable, maybe, or we also want to be genuine in that. And there's still farmers that give me grief over the khaki pants and the fleece jacket I wore to some meeting that they said I was way overdressed. So Tim, as a farmer, does it matter to you how someone appears when they first meet you or come out to the farm?
To some respects, it does. I've always thought that when I was in extension, what we were always trained is dressed as the professional, but you don't want to get, too overdressed, is a way to say it. I always think of a farmer as probably being in a pair of jeans, and if you're meeting with them on the farm, they're probably in a pair of dirty jeans, so have clean jeans on. You want to look professional, but you don't want to show up in a business suit. And on the flip side of that is, I've always felt, don't show up in shorts and a pair of sandals type of thing. So it does make a difference. I mean, you need to look professional. You need to look like the person that, they're going to put their faith in, and like, something. So, being a little bit dressed more than the farmer, I think, is a good thing. But, we've always said one step up is probably where to be. Look at how they're probably going to be dressed and be one step.
So let's build on these connections that we've been talking about with our farmers and ranchers, and how do we take it to the next step and get a demonstration set up on a farm? So Tim, as a farmer, let's say you agreed to have a demonstration site on your farm. Walk us through how you'd want the planning and setup to go. What's reasonable and makes it easy for you to be a cooperator?
You're going to need to make that contact with me first, to let me know what to expect, what's reasonable, and what I'm able to do, and probably make an appointment to discuss, what we're going to do. And then, you know, when you do show up to work on the demonstration, be prepared. You know, have your ducks in a row, have everything lined up, you know, don't waste my time type of thing. But if a farmer, or if I personally get bought into a research demonstration, and farmers that I work with, if they buy into it and are interested in it, they'll take the time to work with you and you know, buy into it. They'll use their equipment and take that time. I guess at the same time, if I'm putting in a demo plot, and if it's during the heat of planting season or something like that in crop production, you know, I don't maybe want to spend my whole day doing it, but you know, if I'm bought in, I'll take the time to work with whoever I'm working with, and especially, like I said, if I'm bought in. So lay out the expectations for us, and be ready to roll when you get there.
Yeah, that's good. Always being prepared. I mean, even when I go to the field, it frustrates me personally if I'm not prepared, because I feel like I'm wasting precious time in the field, let alone the farmer's time. When that equipment's running and they're ready to go, it's time to go. And Kim, you've done a lot of on-farm demonstrations. And how do you make it easier for farmers to cooperate on projects if they have a site in their field, or how do you work with them to make that efficient?
I've had a lot of luck with setting down and planning. You got to make sure you have a good plan going in. And so we've done our objectives and our goals. Like, what am I trying to get out of it? What do you want to see get out of it? How can we benefit from it the most? And so once we sit down and we determine, hey, you know what, we're targeting soil health here, or we're going to target cover crops, you can kind of steer it in the right direction from there. But that farmer, to me, is the most important key in this role. Like, without him, without his commitment, without his time, you're just a sitting duck. And so I feel like you gotta have that really good relationship. You gotta pick that guy that's not gonna just tuck tail and run in year 2 or 3 because now he doesn't like it. So make sure when you sit down, like, it's hard to paint out the 5-year, but hey, this is what we are looking at, what it should look like. Is this something you're interested in? Would you be okay with this? So communication. And then the second one that I feel is important too is, like, I'm kind of the middleman. And so I'm not putting all this weight on my farmer. I'm going to line up with MDA. I'm going to line up the soil scientists. I'm going to line up the agronomists. I'm going to do the legwork behind it so that he can still operate his farm like he needs to. You know, his time is mostly set on what he's doing and what he's got going on. And so I don't want to take his time away from that. And so I make sure that I'm doing the legwork and that I'm lining people up, but then I'm checking with him. Vance, does this time work for you? Would this work for you? Is it okay if we bring this guy out? And so always having the communication with the farmer, and then being willing to do the legwork, to being able to run out and find what you need to make this site successful.
Share the results too. Share the results with the farmer. They're out there working it. They want to know what's going on. They want to know what happened, what the results showed.
Before you have a field day.
Yeah, right.
Is that bringing a bunch of graphs and tables out to you, Tim, though, or what does that look like in sharing the results? How do you want those presented to you?
Simplify it. It might be graphs and results, like, you know, and tables, maybe, depending what you have, but, you know, simplify it. Show me what you found, and, you know, what you were looking for, and whether it worked or didn't work. I want to know, you know, what did I just spend my time doing? And share that with me. And then maybe talk about the future, you know, the next step.
Both Kim and Tim touched on some really good, important points that we've been making sure to be clear on as we're progressing with our SARE demonstration project that we're currently in the middle of. And we started out, before we even started any field work, with a meeting with all of our cooperators, every party involved, just to make sure we're all on the same page. We know what we're committing to. And some people backed out after that initial meeting because they weren't willing to commit to that 3 year in that project, and that's understandable. And so being clear on what's expected, the timeline, and who's doing what in terms of workload, I think that was very important. And then with our grazing project, there's a lot of grazing move dates and a lot of moving parts. And so, you know, constant communication, phone calls, text messages that are reminding, you know, in 2 days you need to move your cows. How are things looking? Do we need to move things earlier? Do we need to readjust? So that we're on the same page. And if something's changed, I know that they're going to call me because they have a concern. And if I see a concern, I'm going to get a hold of them. So we have that good communication back and forth. And then, you know, following our first year, we all got together and went through those results. And this is what we found in year 1 across our different locations. And this is why we're seeing these differences. And we had a really good conversation back and forth with all those participants. And I think that's really important, is that communication and keeping everybody updated on what's going on. So Abby, you have a lot of demonstration project sites, such as the Share Farm. What are your strategies?
Yeah, so I run, when I first started NDSU, I had probably a dozen or so on-farm smaller demonstration sites that were probably on about 10 acres of land, and they all dealt with salinity management. So I worked with county agents in each of those areas to find locations that those farmers would work with us on these practices for 3 or 4 years. And those went okay. One thing I learned as I was out there with this small 10-foot drill trying to seed these small plots on 10 acres, and I watched these large infield trials going out that were on 100 acres. The infield trials that the farmer was just seeding the different cover crop mixes and going across the field, he was almost looking out the window laughing at us because we're out there fiddling with this 10-foot drill and trying to get things to work. And that was when I kind of realized that doing things field scale and large scale and actually using the farmer's equipment was a really good idea. It adds some variability into what you're looking at, but that was kind of the premise for these share farms, or the soil health and agriculture research extension farms. And that was to use 160 or 180 acres of land and put these treatments out there across the entire field. Sure, the risk may be a little bit higher because you're influencing more acres, but the results are going to be more meaningful. You're going to get those treatments installed a lot faster. And I think then farmers can drive by that field and they can see what's happening at field scale. So for our cooperators, that's kind of what worked best for soil health, was to have these large field scale experiments. I did the same thing with the listening and with the coordinating that everybody else has mentioned. So before I even started one of these share farm locations down in Morton, I met with probably about a dozen growers from that area. And honestly, they had a bad experience with extension prior to that. So I took a beating for 3 hours. I listened to their concerns, to how maybe they had felt either abandoned or, and this is nothing towards extension. It was just that person was at the end of their career and they were kind of transitioning out. So their most recent experience had been a poor one. So I listened. I tried to take that information back to other people that I was working with. I listened to what their concerns were about some of the recommendations we were making. I listened to some of the things that they felt were really positive about extension. And then I tried to rope that into the program because I wanted to make sure that this was a program for the farmers and that they had significant buy-in. And then the cooperator we found, we got lucky on the first shot with the farmer we asked to participate. He was willing to do it right off the bat. And so we talked with him about how this was going to work and did he have the equipment? And if he didn't, were we going to use neighboring farmers to get that equipment there to be able to do what we wanted to do and evaluate what we were looking to evaluate. And then, like everybody's mentioned, sharing the results. I think the first year I presented him with a binder of information and he kind of looked at me like, okay, this is nice. I'm going to put this on my shelf right now. And then the next year it was like, I kind of figured out that actually just walking through the field with him was the best way to show those results, and sharing some of that information in the field when our hands are in the soil, looking at what's happening and how things are changing, riding in the tractor when I could, being there when we're running the weigh wagons for the yields, and just making sure that I was very present for a lot of that. And then listening and learning about that farmer cooperator's family as well. Now, I don't want to drag on, but our second share farm cooperator, and asking him was, he wasn't sure he wanted to be involved, but he listed off a couple other growers that he thought would be good farmers in that area to contact. And that's also an avenue. He still would have buy-in on that project and if another farmer were cooperating on it. But he ended up, in the end, he decided that he really wanted to be part of this, and he's been a very good cooperator. But looking at those other options, if somebody's not comfortable, asking that farmer, who else would you recommend? Who else could be involved in this project that you think would be good for this?
And how do you design these studies? Is it purely for demonstration, or do you try to use an experimental design to run statistics? And I'll go first, and I'll see if Abby might have a different perspective. So my study, we did set it up that it's replicated. Hopefully we'll be able to run statistics on it, but knowing there's some variation, there might be some variability because all of our producers have different animals at different stages in their life cycle on the livestock component. We also have 2 locations that are replicated on site at Fargo and in Streeter, so that we have some sites that are controlled in a more research setting than those on-farm sites. But I think you always go into idealism, but you have to have a backup plan would be my perspective. And if you're looking for outside funding, they're gonna want to see that experimental design for you to run those statistics, but know that something might go wrong, probably will go wrong, and you're going to have to adjust on the ground.
Yeah, kind of a similar experience for me. You know, when you're looking at a quarter of land, you're not going to have 3/4 of land typically with those same treatments or experiments. So so you do get into this idea of pseudo replication, and all that means is that you've got all your treatments on the same field, which is your replicate. And there are ways to deal with that statistically, and I've got great colleagues that can do that. I don't necessarily do all the statistics anymore. I can hardly say the word. But they know how to handle that and to get the information out of it. And Kim, you've got a site too where you've got some, you know, field scale work. Did you replicate it, or did you find that was necessary for the work that you're doing?
I did not. And so I guess Vance was good with what we had, and I thought about it. I've had people ask more than one, and so, but as of right now, no, it's just a solo site.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that too, you know, to be able to see those things if you're influencing, or, you know, or looking to influence growers. So yeah, I guess we've got a question about ag retailers, and how do you work with an ag retailer if they aren't on board or with soil health or another NDSU message? And Tim, let's go to you for this one. How do you work with ag retailers that aren't necessarily on board?
You know, that's kind of a tough question. Luckily, when I was working extension, I had a local agronomist that was on board. You know, people used to ask him, you know, how do you get involved with soil health if you're planting cover crops and trying to build soil health, you're cutting your own throat. You know, I'm going to apply less fertilizer, therefore you don't get the sale. And you know, he used to argue the other side that his job was to make the producers more money. And so if that would be to, you know, produce more output from the crop or reduce inputs, that was his job. And he said, I may not sell him fertilizer, but I'm going to get to sell him cover crop seed. So he said, it's kind of a wash. But he said, in the end, my job is to make the producer more money. And so if I had an agronomist or somebody in the ag retail sector that wasn't on board with cover crops, I mean, you can't force cover crops or soil health on anybody. They've got to want to learn it. You know, it's a passion. But you're going to have to show them the results. And that may be throwing them in a vehicle or getting in a vehicle with them and just going around and looking at some of the things, showing them some of the results from your demos or your trials. You know, it's kind of a complicated question, but if they're not on board, you just got to slowly work on them and show them the results that you're finding, whether it be university-wide through NRCS or whatever. But you know, take them out to some of the trials and you know, get them involved.
You know, how do you approach a field day on these sites, and what is critical to success? Kim, let's go to you for that one.
What we are doing is we hold yearly in the summer. We hold the field days in the summer, and we had a really good turnout last year, even with COVID. I feel like when you get outside, people are more comfortable than they would be in a building setting with the pandemic right now. But I feel what's really critical to success is sharing your story. And so like we're having the maps made up so that when people come to the site, they're not wondering what's going on, but they have a good idea. Handouts are really good. You can go overboard with that, but I feel like a map of the site so that they can reference that as they're walking around. They really need to be able to see what is where, what treatments where, and what this was. So we have markers up. We have steel posts that we have painted white and orange, showing where the field changes, so they don't have to try to pick that out themselves. But and then sharing that info, I feel like that's what is going to make it a success. Whether it's good or bad, whether you like it or not, it's got to be the raw, hard data that you're showing them what you found and what's going on, and being open about it. Advertising, I guess, is a big one too. A field day success too. Making sure you have the right crowd. You've got the right speakers that come across, and they know what they're talking about, so that it's not a bunch of questions, but it kind of hits home to them and they can connect to the crowd. I feel is really important to a successful field day. And feedback, I guess we've always got good feedback. So making sure you check off everything on your list of like porta potties. That was probably my first field day that I did. I completely forgot about that, and I had to emergency call these folks in Wapaton, and luckily I got one out there. But yeah, it's always good to reference what others are doing or what they have or what that was successful for them, and build on that too.
Nice. How about you, Miranda? You've done quite a few field days and things out there.
Yeah, I think one thing I like to do is if you can have a farmer rancher, whether it's at their site or if it's at a research center site that's doing the same practices, have them share their story. You get so much more buy-in when somebody that has skin in the game compared to us as a researcher or extension specialist is just talking about it. When they share their story, it's a lot more powerful than us just sharing data. And so I think that's really important.
Tim, you've done some different style field days where I think you've just driven or had, a line of pickups going around to different field sites where there weren't necessarily demonstrations, but people trying new practices. And can you talk about coordinating that or how that worked?
That can work out pretty well. So farmers then can leave when they want or come when they want. But we've set up where everybody meets at a certain location, and from you start with the talk or demonstration at the first place, and then you move on, in tow everybody behind each other. We've done pickups behind each other. 4 or 5 farmers get in a pickup, take off to the next site. Usually you try to keep everything fairly close together so that you're not driving for half an hour to the next site. But if you can drive 5 miles, 10 miles to the next site, that works really good. We've even had some tours where we get a bus in, throw everybody on a bus and move them around, or pickups follow the bus. We've had a couple times I've thrown one of my most successful meetings was a livestock cover crop soil health type of meeting where I think we had 11 guys that drove to Bismarck, which is about a 3-hour drive for us, to visit with a producer. And we left at 6 in the morning. We're home by 3 in the afternoon. We spent a couple hours with a producer. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that, and they can be really successful.
Yeah, I've done that too, where I've loaded up a few different farmers in a vehicle, and we've driven to Carrington to go look at the REC demonstration plots that they have out there, their research plots. And honestly, that time in the vehicle with those farmers is incredibly valuable, because you're not just talking about soil health, you're talking about everything. And so that can be a really effective way to do it. Now, in times of COVID, this is going to be different because you can't necessarily load up a bunch of people in a vehicle, without concerns there. But, I guess I'd like to get back to some of that, in times of COVID, how are we going to do all this stuff? And I don't know, let's maybe go to Kim and see, Kim, how are you going to change things up in COVID to still create these connections and do your field days? And how are you going to do that?
I guess our plan is to still host them outside. We didn't get to do our farmer panel this year in the winter like we usually do because of the indoor settings. But I'm going to go for the outdoor setting and keep it wide open so that people that are concerned about it can have space. We're going to split it up so that not one crowd is all gathered in one area, but yet you can go over here to talk about what happened with cover crops. You can go over here to talk about what's going on with the water monitoring, and then you can go over here to talk about the soil monitoring. And so we're going to have it kind of so that they can split up into smaller groups, and then I find they're more open to talk to if you can get them into smaller groups, if you have a large amount of people at a field day. So as of right now, that is our plan on hosting our summer field day in July, and I've had a lot of people say they're coming. So I guess I'm not too concerned about it right now. I think we're going to get tents because it's going to be rain or shine. And so we'll get some big tents set up in case we do have some foul weather. But as of right now, I guess we're going to just keep moving ahead as planned at the site.
Miranda, what are you going to do differently?
I think what I liked about this year with some of the stuff we did is that we transitioned everything video, but I like that combination of video in person. So maybe we can highlight things ahead of time, do some videos and get some interest, and then get some people out there so we can reach maybe some new audience members that way, and then have something to share during the off season when we're not on the field, and remind people what we're doing out there, and some things as they're planning for that next growing season that they might want to think about as they're doing that.
how do you measure impact from these field days? And we did have two really good evaluation workshops earlier in the series that we'll post those online so you can check that out. But you know, Tim, at the county level, when you were hosting field days, how did you measure impact from them?
You know, we usually, if we could, would try to do an evaluation of some type at the field day, so get a little bit of feedback from producers. And a lot of times it's just the conversation that went on afterwards, or maybe right after the meeting, is a good gauge just to feel out what did, you know, people gain from it. Did they like the meeting? I mean, it doesn't give you, you know, statistics or anything like that, but I mean, a lot of times, you know, after a meeting, whether or not it was successful just by the conversation that goes on. But if we could, we always tried to do some type of evaluation, 1-page sheet, 3-4 questions, just to try to gauge. And another thing you can do is, if you got a sign up list, send out an evaluation to them. Usually you don't get a really good return on those, but you know, try to get some feedback. It's always good to have that evaluation tool to get the feedback on how things went and how you can improve.
Yeah, how about you, Miranda? What kinds of things are you going to do to measure impact, or have you done?
Yeah, so it's probably similar, that have an evaluation piece at the meeting, but I think also whether it's a formal follow-up evaluation or it's a conversation with some of those that have attended, did you make changes within the year? Are you planning on making changes? What type of changes are you planning on making? Because that's the real impact, is somebody actually making those changes. And you know, did it benefit your crop production? Did it benefit your grazing system? Or, you know, did you have less time in a feedlot setting, for example? So you have lower winter grazing costs. And so those are the things I think that are important, is what actually happens in that next year, that those decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I always think an easy kind of low-hanging fruit too is a zip code map. So especially if you're working at the state level, get people's zip code when they check in, and then you can at least create a map of how far your reach was for your program. Maybe at the county level that might not be as important, but you may be drawing people from other counties, and maybe you could see in that zip code map on new partnerships that you could create with other county agents to do more of a regional field day versus just a, you know, one at the county level. So there's some easy kind of low-hanging fruit type information that you can get, and zip code is one of them. So that's a great way to measure impact. Now we have another question here that's a little bit longer, so I'm going to try to read it in these bright lights. We're seeing farmer attendance has fallen at field days, replaced with scientists in retail. What could be done to curb this? And are you noticing the same? Who would like to answer this question? I don't know, Miranda, let's go to you.
I think it really depends on the topics being covered. And I know we have had pretty good attendance at a lot of our field days. And I think part of that's because of the demonstrations research we're doing is based off of farmer panels or producer panels, advisory boards, our input we're getting during some of our other events. I know a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is based off of things that come up during our cafe talks and events like that, so that the research and the demonstrations are something people want to see. I think other things as you're planning is just some time of day, and you're always going to run into, it's field season, so it's a good day for haying and it's a good day for this, and you can't do anything about that. We're all busy and we need to balance that as well. I do like the idea of having the videos, though, that somebody can at least have an update or know what's going on and follow up with you later. So I think that's another nice approach. What about you, Kim, at your local level? What are you guys seeing?
When we do have one, we typically look at what's the ratio agency folk to farmers, and it's 60-40. And then I also am always looking at young versus old, like what do we have for that crowd of farmers? Is it the new and upcoming I'm kind of targeting, or is it the older generation? And we had about a split at our last one this summer, and it was a 60-40, and we don't have to report that. And so for us, I guess it's not that important. I love the zip code idea though, Abby, because then you can kind of gauge it when we do write-ups on it. But yeah, for us at the local level, I do feel that a lot of it is agency folk, but depending on your topic, I would agree, Miranda, that you know, with like the soil health one we had in the summer, that was the 60-40. Our dirt and donut talk that was probably 70-30, if I remember right. It was a lot of farmers that attended that one. But I feel like your topic, and then for impact, we don't do any kind of, you don't send out any evals or anything. I guess I judge it by when they come up to me afterward or send me an email or give me a call and say, when's your next one? So I usually have farmers that are open and they talk pretty good. So I usually get emails or something on that. So I guess that's how we gauge whether it was impactful or not. I'm going to keep doing it either way.
Well, and I want to ask the question even too, is it bad to have scientists in retail at a field day, right? I mean, granted, oftentimes we're trying to get farmers there, but people in retail are also sharing information and meeting with a lot of people. Scientists, I give scientists a lot of credit if they're at a field day because they are there to learn about practical applications and maybe to get ideas for research. And so, maybe flipping this around to say, yeah, our target audience is farmers, but if the agenda we're creating is drawing these other groups, that may be a good thing too. So let's not discount that as a positive part of a field day. And we used to, when we started the cafe talks, which are small group discussion meetings, I actually would talk with the different conservation districts and also the NRCS to say, if you could send one person to this meeting, that would be great. Please don't send 10, because we want it to be predominantly farmers. And I think that worked for starting the program. But as the program grew, it was really beneficial to have people from the NRCS there, or Pheasants Forever, or anyone that offers kind of programs for farmers to get these practices on the ground. It was incredibly valuable to have them there to share that information. And it probably was a gateway too to getting them into either the extension office or into those NRCS or conservation district offices as well. So I think, keep open mind about this and don't put your blinders on, but having the scientists in retail there can also be incredibly valuable. Here's a question that let's see. I have a thought about including some podcast teasers for field days. Any advice on how to make that leap? And that's a good question. We promote the Dirt Workshop. We promoted that in our Soil Sense podcast. So Tim Hamrich, when he would introduce the concepts or the idea for that podcast episode, that he would mention that, hey, the Dirt Workshop's coming up and it's online, so you can register and save your seat. I think it's a good way to do it. I certainly, I should be promoting the podcast that we have in this event too, and saying, if you want more follow-up information, we have a great evaluation podcast episode with Gene Haley that does all our work, and you can go back to season 2 and check that out. I think anytime you can cross those lines of communication and share the information in multiple ways, I think it's a great idea. And if you have the same feeling about that, Miranda.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, a good example was the Dirt Workshop, that you had a lot of the presenters on Soil Sense. So I think that, that's a good lead in, that people it gets their interest of getting more information at that event. And so it definitely can't hurt.
How do you know what kind of demo experiment will work best at a field day? Should I go back to you for that one, Miranda, and see what you think?
I think anytime that you're setting up a demo experiment is going back to those questions. What are the questions that we need to answer to help our farmers and ranchers? What are the gaps in our current research and knowledge? And that's kind of how I go about it and approach things, is what kind of questions have I been getting? And I don't have solid answers for or resources for. So we get lots of questions on stocking rate for cover crops or carrying capacity for cover crops. And so we're trying to get some research to better estimate that instead of having to go out and do a field clip and weigh, because that's the only way we know of right now. But anything we can do to make it easier for farmers and ranchers to make a decision and fill in questions that we're getting, I think that's successful, because that's what they're wanting. And so you'll get people out there to check it out.
I've kind of struggled with that, because I wonder, if you have smaller plots, it's easier to see things without walking very far, right? I mean, so if you have people that are coming to a field day that maybe, don't want to walk all the way into the field, you can show a lot of things in these smaller plots. But at the same time, I've walked a group of farmer at least, halfway through a quarter into the middle of the field, and they followed and they've been interested in looking at things. So obviously, if you're going to set up a demo site, you probably want it closer to the road so that you can see, what you can see what you want to see basically within a very short distance. Maybe a space where you could set up some seating options for people. Because remember, not everybody is going to want to stand for several hours. Not everybody is going to want to walk a long distance. So you have to be really cognizant of those, even, disabilities and things like that, as to making sure that the program is accessible to everyone. So maybe even sometimes it's a combination of having some of these small plots along an edge where maybe you're seeding some different cover crop species on a strip where the farmer ran out of seed and they needed something to go in that space anyways. And then you have the field scale work that you can look at, and people can walk into the field further and get off the headland. But I do think, as public institutions, we do need to be aware of disabilities and limitations that people may have in the field. And like Kim said, having a tent is a really good idea. So if you have a space, whether it's on CRP that's next to the field or something where you can set up that tent and provide some shade if it gets to be really hot, or if it's rainy or windy, that's a nice option to have. And you can put your porta potty there too, Kim, right? Any thoughts from you, Kim, on what kind of demos work really well?
I think Miranda hit it too, that going by what people are asking you. I drive around the county and I can see what we got issues with. I can see we've got salinity on headlands and that we've got bad erosion, especially right now. The ditches are just full of snert. And so I look at the areas where we could improve, and then what would it look like? And so that's how our demo site got started, is that I know we have a problem, and farmers know we do, and we just are looking for a way that would make it more convenient for them to see what it would look like on their land and show them, yes, we've got heavy clays, but what would it look like if we did min-till or no-till or strip-till, and how that would incorporate. So I feel Miranda kind of hit that one on the head there, because it's definitely going out and seeing what you got going on in your area, because everyone has different soils and everybody's dealing with different row crops and how farming is interpreted in your area. So I feel like making sure that you don't just try to pull one and copy it and do this in your county. I feel like you need to go and find what you're dealing with, what the issues are, and what farmers are willing to do, so that you do kind of give them a good idea of what it would look like and help them make that step.
It's great to have a demonstration, but how do you get people there? And so, Tim, how did you get people to your demonstration sites? How did you advertise for these events that you would hold as a county agent?
A lot of times was just simply getting the word out. That's kind of hard, and but text messages. At times I have enough names in my phone, and I'd send out text messages the day before or the day of. Doing mass mailings to the county, it takes a little postage, but just getting the word out to everybody that this stuff is going on, and then just finding things that farmers are interested in. You guys have talked about it quite a bit, but finding those things that farmers are extremely interested in, and then making a demo site or a field day or something that is around that, and then just getting the word out any way you can. Flyers around town, text messages, postcards, that type of thing out to the local producers, just to let them know that it's going on, and remind them. And a lot of times, everybody wants their information in a different way, or how they get notified about things. And it used to be 25 years ago, I could send out a letter to everybody. Now it seems like you got to send a text message to them to remind them, or an email. It seems like nobody reads emails anymore, so now you're texting them. And Twitter, Facebook, all those type of things. If you have those tools at your disposal, use them all.
Just a follow-up to that for you, Tim, is, as a farmer, where do you find out about your events, or the most of them? Which ones do you see, and where do you see it that you have to go to?
Miranda, I thought about that a little bit before the meeting today. As when I was an extension agent, you'd get information out and you'd think, well, how come I had a poor turnout on this? And as a farmer now, and especially during these COVID times, I realized sometimes just how far away from town I am, or how often how far it is in between days that I see people. And so sometimes you feel like, as a farmer, I'm not connected on a daily basis, that you think, well, everybody knows what's going on in the community. Well, I live 30 miles out of the main town, we're from the extension agent right now. And right now, if it's not put in my face, I don't see it. And so when it comes to advertising for these things, it needs to be a text and say, hey, this is coming up, or I miss it. I'm busy doing my daily thing, and I I don't know what's going on. Even though you may have hung up a flyer in town, I'm not going to see it. So somehow you have to get information to the farmer and where they're going to see it. And for me right now, it's either a quick text or an email or something that puts it on my phone. My phone dings, I look at it. So sometimes I think that phone quick text telling me something's coming up is maybe the best way to let me know. And I miss some of those, quite honestly. So it almost has to be thrown out in front of my face often and a lot for me to realize something's going on.
Yeah, that's true. I know one of our most well-attended cafe talks was because that agent had texted and called all the farmers to get him. That was Brad Brummond up in Walsh County. I think he must have called like 90 people because they all showed up. And Tim, I think you've done the same in Eddy County. I know that you probably reached out to a lot of different growers and called them and said, this is a great opportunity.
I was just thinking back, Abby, to a prior life before I was extension agent in Eddy County for 20 years. Back when I first got started, we used to have a field day down in Carson, North Dakota. And I had a list that every year I called 120 farmers and started the day before. And I would get on the phone and I would call and call and call. And quite honestly, we'd have 100 people show up for that every year. And it's because I made a personal phone call to them and told them it was coming up, and usually there was a meal at it. But that thing is the best field day we ever, it was something that the Hettinger Research Center helped work on. But I had a list that I called, and man, it was amazing the turnout we'd have at that thing just because of that personal phone call.
Yeah, I see some comments in the chat that a phone call can sometimes last 60 minutes. so maybe
that's not a bad thing. You want to talk
right?
about that personal contact and trying to make a relationship? That's a good thing.
Yeah, that is a good thing. And now, you can text, right? I mean, a text usually is a lot quicker if you feel like you don't have that time to spend in the 60 minutes. One of the things that I've tried too is that I will call some growers and I'll say, we're going to make this kind of jokingly a +1 event. So bring somebody with you who's your +1. It could be your banker, it could be your your neighbor, it could be your agronomist, but try to bring one person with you to get some new people to this type of event. And I think that's worked. It kind of creates a little laugh first, on your +1, like you're going to a wedding or something, but at least it gets another person there. Here's a question, and then we'll wrap things up on how do you identify and reach out to potential partners for financial and technical support? And Kim, I know you've hustled and done a lot with getting financial support for your projects. And how have you done this?
So we just laid out the scope of the project, and I've emailed it to, and personal calls I feel are very important. And so when you deal with people at Titan, you got that go-to. When you deal with people at RDO, you got that go-to. Your agronomists, we host agronomist meetings, so I see these guys yearly. So to pick up the phone and call them isn't hard. And then the ag businesses, excuse me, you just make it relatable to them. So I feel like we had a lot of success with finding funding for our demo site because we reached out to the ag world, and these ag people see the benefit of what this demo site will have on the landscape here in the Red River Valley. And so we had previous communications with a lot of them. And so I feel like that goes back to those networking at events. And so if you see these guys at a convention or somewhere you're dealing with soil health, or like Miranda mentioned, you can go to these other, it doesn't have to be ag related, but events in the community or around town, and let them know who you are. Make sure you get your face out there. And so that when you have that opportunity come available to you, you've already kind of made that connection and established it, and then show them the importance of it and what this is going to do to our area and to our farmers and how they will see the benefit of it. And, you got to express to them too that, you know what, I'm going to use your logo. I'm going to have a sign on site. I'm going to welcome you to set up at the field days. I'm going to use your name on the radio. I'm going to use your name in any paper that I put it in, any interview. And so make sure that they know how important they are to it. Without your success, without your donation, this site wouldn't be a success. And so we are hosting a Zoom meeting coming up here with all our sponsors. And so again, we'll express to them what your money is going towards, what we are going to get out of it, how we're going to share it, how we're going to utilize it in the 5 years to come. And so I feel like making that connection with them and helping them realize how important it is to this project and how important your project or demo site is to the surrounding area will help you sell that.
And I think to add just on that don't overlook grants or because you think that they're only for research. There's a lot of granting and funding opportunities that can help you set up a demonstration project, that can help a rancher try something new. So I think those are good opportunities and important not to overlook those as well.
I guess, should we go around and see if make sure we covered everything? Kim, let's start with you. Did we get everything, or is there still something that was left unsaid?
The one thing that I feel benefits me the most is having my agronomist. And so I challenge you guys to reach out because I don't know how many people do that, but if you want to know what's going on and you want to sell a product, you want to sell a program or financial incentives to a farmer, that agronomist I feel is your first step because they know their farmers. They've been working with them for years. They know what their rotation looks like, and farmers trust them. So a huge part of my success, I'm going to own up to my agronomists in Wilkin County because I work with them avidly and they call me, we email all the time. So I feel like if you have a takeaway from this one, from me, do more to reach out to your agronomists and people you have in the area that are working with your farmers. And that's a good way to gain trust because when they say, hey, this so-and-so called me and told me to call you, they're just automatically starting to trust you.
And how about for you, Tim? Anything that we missed that we kind of left unsaid?
Not really. I'm going to double down and what Kim just said. Get to know your agronomist. I think that's huge. For any specialist that's out there that's listening, get to know the county agents. I think Miranda's done a really good job of that over the years. Working with the county agents, they're the local contact. NRCS people get to know your extension agent. Extension agents get to know your NRCS people and your district people. And again, like Kim said, get to know your agronomists. For extension agents or local people, like Kim said, one thing we did mention a little bit, but don't be afraid when you're driving down the road in an afternoon and farmers stopped in the field and doing something, whether they're unloading a combine or loading a truck, doing something, stop in, just pull in and talk to them. I mean, you want to get to know people, pull in where they're at, where they're working. If you see them walking around the yard and you got a little time, pull in and visit with them. Don't waste their time, but spend a couple minutes with them, visiting with them. You're just amazed. I always said when you stop in a farmer's yard and talk to them, within 2 weeks they'll call you. Just out of the blue. And I used to enjoy doing that, just out of the blue, pulling into somebody's yard if I saw them walking around, sit and visit for a couple minutes and take off. They'll make a contact, they'll call you. And so that's my take on just get to know the people you're working with and put an agronomist in the vehicle and do a drive around once in a while. Get to know them.
Well, I'd say most farmers too, if you're not coming into their yard to sell something, they're probably pretty happy to see you too. So if you're nervous about pulling into a yard like that, just know that if you're not selling something to them, that they're probably pretty happy to see you. And Miranda, is there anything that you left unsaid?
I just think the big thing, and Tim probably touched on it, is building relationships with those people that so you understand what's going on. We hear a lot in extension that sometimes we're not relevant or we're being reactive. And so I think that, being proactive, having conversations with those county agents as a specialist, the ranchers, the people out on the ground, having those conversations so that what the issues are and that the programming you're providing is it helping address those issues. I think that's really the most important thing for me.
Yeah, and I would wrap up with the idea of how Tim mentioned being honest, being trustworthy, being a good listener. So those just simple things that you can do that don't require a whole lot can really lay a lot of groundwork for you too in these connections.